Hi, my name's Dominic Chambers, and today I'd like to talk about why I believe that Bitcoin will ultimately end up going to zero. Okay, first of all, I'd like to start by saying that I don't think that's going to happen that quickly or anytime soon, but I do think it's ultimately inevitable, and I'd like to talk to you today as to why I think that's the case. So, the first thing to talk about is this idea that Bitcoin is a digital gold. Now, although it has some properties of gold, for example, particularly the fact that it can't be inflated forever, so there's this limited supply of it, it isn't like digital gold because it isn't a commodity. And this is a point that Peter Schiff has made on a number of occasions, and I think it's a really good one. The consequence of that is that unlike gold, gold can never go to zero because there are industrial uses for gold, which mean that people will always want to buy gold. So although you have speculators coming in and you also have people who are just using it as a store of value, all of that use is on top. Even when you get rid of all of that, you always have the fact that you've got this industrial use, which is never going to go away because gold has unique properties and there's a very limited supply of it. So there's a floor that you can never go past. Bitcoin, on the other hand, isn't like that. There is no commodity value. A Bitcoin isn't a physical thing that you can go and do something with. So that means that there isn't this floor from this commodity value. The only reason Bitcoin has any value is because it has a couple of technological applications that are unique and that haven't yet been replicated elsewhere. So what are those technological applications? Well, there are two of them. One is the fact that it's an illicit medium of exchange, and the other one is that it's an illicit store of value. So you have those two technological applications as your basis upon which you're building, and then on top of that you have a lot of people who are using it they're speculators. They're hoping that the price is going to go up. Now the problem with speculation is if the only people in the market are speculators, then they're all relying on there being a greater fall that goes and buys it from them at a greater price. The problem with that is you will inevitably run out of those people. And once that happens, if there's nothing else keeping the market, buoying the market, if there are no other buyers to fall back on, you're going to crash to zero. It's a bubble and you're going to drop to zero. So while Bitcoin has these two unique technological applications, that isn't going to happen. Bitcoin isn't going to drop to zero because this is what keeps it propped up. This is what stops that ultimate pullback. There's always a source of buyers that want it for these unique technological applications. But the problem is for Bitcoin is both of those technological applications can be done better elsewhere, or they will be done better elsewhere. So let's talk about both of them and see why it's the case that they're not always going to be done on Bitcoin and eventually they'll be done elsewhere. And so that's inevitable. And that once that happens, my thesis is that Bitcoin will go to zero. So the first one is that it's an illicit medium of exchange. And so what I mean by that, for example, is that you can go onto the dark web and you can go and buy drugs online in something which is very similar to eBay. Now, whether you agree with that or not, me personally, I believe in the golden principle, which is that you should be able to do anything you want as long as you harm nobody else. So I have no problem with it. It's not a particularly good use of your time or a healthy thing to be going and doing loads of drugs, but that's your choice. You have personal responsibility for your own actions, and if that's what you want to do, that's your choice. So now, I will say though, I think it's an amazing application. The fact that you can actually go and do this just proves that Bitcoin has properties that no other system had before it, which is incredible. The problem for Bitcoin is that Bitcoin isn't a very good medium of exchange. There's a number of problems. If you compare it with Ethereum is cheaper, much lower transaction fees. It's faster, so the settlement happens much more quickly. And also, Ethereum has lots of different tokens, including what are called stable coins. So for example, you have tokens which are tightly track the US dollar, which is much less volatile. Or you also have tokens which track gold because they're physically backed in gold, which is stored in sort of vaults, secure vaults in Singapore and independently audited, yada yada. So you've got, it's cheaper, it's faster, and if you want, and you use a stable coin, there's less volatility, which takes risk away from the buyer and the seller. So Ethereum is just a much better medium of exchange. Now, I will imagine that over time, the dark web will transition to this because it's just better. The only reason people probably aren't doing this sooner is because they probably haven't tried Ethereum. They just know about Bitcoin, that's all they've used. If you've gone and used both, then you'll just be like, Ethereum is just much, much nicer. It's much more powerful, and it has these better benefits. So it's just a matter of time before that transition happens. Okay, so that brings us to the other one, which is the illicit store of value. So just to give you an example of what I'm talking about here, if you lived in Cyprus, then some years ago the government needed money and they went into everyone's bank accounts, and if you had above a certain amount of money, they just went in and took, I think it was 10% or some amount of money. So this was called a bail-in. Now, as you can imagine, after that happened, there was a huge spike of interest in blockchain, or Bitcoin in particular, because, people suddenly needed to protect themselves from their own government. So, whether you agree with that kind of thing, you can't deny that Bitcoin allows you to store value in a way that is out of the control or out of the reach of both government and the legal system. And whether you agree with that or not, there are some uses, particularly in authoritarian governments, or valid uses rather, and that isn't going to go away. The need for that kind of thing isn't going to go away while there continue to be authoritarian governments. So, but once again, the problem is that Bitcoin isn't always going to be the best illicit store of value. There are going to be others that are better. Now, the point at which I think this is going to happen, that this transition will happen to another system, is because I believe it's inevitable that the entire global financial system will eventually and ultimately be replaced by a system based on smart contracts. Now, I've got another video that I made where I discuss this, so I'll link that. Please go and have a look at that if you haven't already watched it, and then come back here once I've hopefully convinced you that that's an inevitability. But the point I'm going to make then is, if we end up with a system where the entire global financial system has been replaced and is on one blockchain system, whichever system ends up probably winning, and same goes for insurance and lots of other kind of financial instruments, everyone's going to use this system. It's going to be like the internet explosion, and it's like, who isn't using the internet? Everyone is. So everyone's going to be using the system. So what's going to happen? We're going to get to a point where a number of people are going to ask themselves, well, I'm already using this new system, this third generation crypto, which is probably what it's going to be to actually support all of that. I'm using this new system, but I've got this other crypto platform too. So basically, I'm running two crypto platforms. And the problem with that is there's a speed bump. When I want to move value across from Bitcoin to this other one where all of the cool services are and everything that I want to do is, then it's a pain to actually do it. So you're going to get a number of people, the early adopters, that start to move money across. And the problem with that is that we haven't got, as I said, Bitcoin isn't a commodity. So you haven't got that basis for commodity. And you will have already lost the medium of exchange, because the medium of exchange will go over to Ethereum much earlier, because you only need a 2G platform like Ethereum as it already is, and it's far superior. So all you're going to be left with is this store of value. Well, once they're the only people, and that's the only game in town, once some people, these early adopters, start to move money across, you're going to get a trickle, which then turns into a stream of money moving across, and that will cause the price to come down. And the problem is what's going to happen at some point, you'll get a negative feedback loop where, as the price drops, that causes more people to move their money into a currency that at the same time is increasing as money moves from Bitcoin into whatever the third generation platform that we end up with is. And so that will cause a collapse to zero, because there will be no other buyers. It will go bidless and it will drop all the way down. Now, that kind of feels to me inevitable, but there is one thing that could be done to slow kind of that down, to reduce the speed at which that happens. And that is, it's possible to, there's a technology called NEPA-POW, which is this idea of proof of work. And what it allows you to do is it makes it possible, technically feasible, to move value from one blockchain to another. So for example, you could move your Bitcoins from Bitcoin to another platform. Now, the people that have come up with this proposal is the Cardano community, which is the third gen blockchain platform that I prefer. It's a really nice blockchain platform. I'll hopefully make some other videos where I talk about the benefits of it. But the chances of Bitcoin adopting this and actually making use of it and working, say, with Cardano so that you can move value across is at the moment zero, because a lot of the blockchain community believe that there should should only be one blockchain and that that blockchain should be Bitcoin. So they have no interest in working with other people. But if they did, you could imagine that when you, instead of selling your Bitcoin, you would move them over to, say, Cardano, and then you could spend them there. If you needed to spend them in Cardano, you would exchange them there, but that would be a much smaller speed bump than having to actually use a completely different system every time you need to bring a bit more value across. So although that isn't going to happen for blockchain anytime soon, there are proposals to maybe potentially work with Litecoin and to implement it on Litecoin. And now, since Litecoin is a clone of Bitcoin, then you could imagine that once the Bitcoin community realise that this is inevitable, they might choose to kind of port that work over that Litecoin did to Bitcoin, so that they can have this same thing where you can move your tokens across and then back again if you need to. However, even if that happens, I still think it's inevitable that ultimately it's going to go to zero, because there are still going to be slight speed bumps. So, for example, if your money is in Bitcoin and you need to spend it for exchange fees or for other services which are likely to use the native currency of ADA, then you're going to have to do exchange. And that's just a bit somewhat annoying thing for you to have to do. It's like, I want to use the service, but before I can use it, let me just go and exchange a bit more money. Now, it's possible they make it so that you can actually spend your money in Bitcoin directly, and it exchanges for your behalf, because smart contracts are composable. So when I interact with one smart contract, if they've chosen to, they could have made it so that they offer that FX kind of exchange behind the scenes for me. But even if that happens, there's going to be FX charges. And if you've ever used FX services, you'll know that there's always a kind of fixed cost component to the FX charge. So that doing lots of small charges is more costly than doing big ones. So there again, there's an advantage for you just to move large chunks of money over. Another example of why you might want to do it, of kind of another speed bump, is that in any currency system, you always end up with one dominant currency, which is used for kind of like the FX chain interchange. And the reason for that is, like, for example, if you say that there are 1,000 different tokens and you want to be able to swap between any two tokens, then if you created, you'd need to create like 1 million different order books, and that's just completely unscalable. So what ends up happening is you have one dominant token or currency, which is the most traded currency, and that becomes the bridging currency. So when you want to go from arbitrary currency 1 to arbitrary currency 2, you use the bridging currency. Now, the bridging currency is always the most actively traded currency, because the costs are cheaper there, because there's more liquidity, and that will always end up being the native token of the platform, because that's the token that you'll use to pay transaction fees in. So that's the one that's being spent most. So ultimately, if you're holding Bitcoin and you want to move your money, for example, into another token, you're going to have to pay slightly higher charges if you're always doing it with Bitcoin rather than holding the native currency. And one more speed bump, or a reason why some people will start to move value away from blockchain, even if they can hold that Bitcoin over on Cardano, is that people may want to move some of their money into a stable coin. For example, you have tokens that already exist on Ethereum and they exist on Cardano, which allow you to hold your money in a US dollar kind of denominated token. It tightly tracks US dollar, so you know that it's not that volatile. And you also have the same for gold. You have tokens which allow you to store your money in gold. They're physically backed by gold. So you might choose to move some of your Bitcoin into those kinds of things, some into dollars, some into gold. And before you know it, this is again causing the price to drop, which creates this negative feedback cycle. So I think ultimately Bitcoin is doomed and will go to zero. Although again, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I don't know what the time horizons for this are. I wouldn't be surprised if it's about a decade, but that's just kind of my thinking on the subject, and we'll see what happens. I know that's a contentious idea, but I'd love to hear your feedback. So if you have, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you think I'm missing anything. Are there other applications of Bitcoin rather, that I'm not kind of considering? Tell me where I've gone wrong, because I'd love to learn. I don't know that this is true, but that's just what it seems to me at the moment. Okay, thank you so much. Bye for now.